Good afternoon, everyone. I am Vivian Fu, the Communication Officer of the East Asian Australasian Flyway Partnership Secretariat. Welcome to the last webinar of the EAFP Youth Think Tank Competition Training Workshop Series. And I will be the moderator for today's webinar. Today, before we start, I think there is some important housekeeping rules that I wanted to bring to you. So Yumi, if you could change to the next slide. Okay, first of all, to know you more, I would like to invite you to change your Zoom name on the on the panel, on the participant name, to your name and the country so that we know more about you. You please mute your microphone so that we are not disturbing the speakers unless you're invited to speak. We may invite you for asking the questions at the end. And if you have any technical problem with Zoom or any questions to the speakers, please feel free to put them into the chat box. So we will try to address this either during the Q&A section or our IT supporter today, Yumi and Yunze, will help to solve the problem. And then please note that this section is now being recorded and it is now live streamed on Facebook. So if you do not want to show your face, you can turn off your webcam. Okay, so next slide. Yes, for some of you who do not know EAFP well, the East Asian Australasian Flyway Partnership, it's a flyway-wide framework to promote dialogue, cooperation, and collaboration between a range of stakeholders at all levels. And our aim is to conserve migratory waterbirds, their habitats, and the livelihood of local communities relying on these habitats in the East Asian Australasian Flyway. So, we are about 10 years old, more than 10 years old. We established in 2006. 2 years ago, going back 2 years ago in 2020, that the East Asian Australasian Flyway and the Youth Engaged in Wetlands YEW organized the first Flyway Youth Forum, aiming to connect, empower, and to provide a platform for our future leaders on conservation of wetlands and migratory waterbirds. That one was a really successful one. We got a lot of interest from the young people and the Flyway and beyond. And to continue this vision, the EAFP Secretariat launched this Youth Think Tank competition in November last year. And in line with that, with the competition itself, is a series of training workshops. And we have covered topics so far on general concept of conservation, global trends, nature-based solution and local communities engagement, project management, and today is the last one, focusing on conservation communication and storytelling. And today you can see that we have 3 incredible speakers waiting here. Ms. Mika Tan from ASEAN Centre for Biodiversity, Mr. Gab Mejia from a conservation photographer and National Geographic explorer, and Ms. Millie Formby from Australia. She's a zoologist, pilot, illustrator, educator of rainfrets. And yes, as this is the last webinar of the program, I would like to invite you all to do a group photo first. So if Yumi, you can, yes, so please turn on your webcam so that we can see your face. And after that, we will take a group photo.
Yes, I'll give everyone a chance to turn on their cameras.
Yeah.
I guess this is everyone. I'll take the picture in 1, 2, 3. And then another one to be safe. So smile, 1, 2, 3. Okay. Maybe, one more to be safe. 1, 2, 3. There we go. Okay, thank you, everyone.
Thanks a lot. Okay, so yeah, I don't want to keep you waiting. Not me speaking today, it's our speaker's time. So first of all, I wanted to introduce our first speaker today. Yumi, if you can, yeah, that is the next slide. And yes, so oh, before that, if you have any questions or the questions to the speakers, please also leave that into the chat box and then we'll address that later on. And yes, our first speaker today is Ms. Mika Tan, ASEAN Youth Biodiversity Program Coordinator from the ASEAN Centre for Biodiversity. Ms. Tang has been working with youth in the environmental scene for the past decade. Her expertise lies in youth empowerment, urban biodiversity, systems thinking, capacity building, public speakings, and facilitation. Currently, she is the coordinator of the ASEAN Youth Biodiversity Program at the ASEAN Centre for Biodiversity, crafting training and mentorship programs to empower youth in the region for the benefits of nature and people. Mika is also the co-founder of the Urban Biodiversity Hub, leading a team to develop a global platform that accelerates the integration of nature-based solutions in urban planning. And if Mika is not in front of a computer, you can find her dancing, running, and exploring outdoors. So Mika, now the stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Vivian. I'm just gonna share my screen. And if you can't see it, please let me know. But on my screen, it's taking a little bit of time to load. But hello, everybody. I'm Mika Tan, as Vivian has kindly introduced me. Today, I will be here to share with you a little bit about why we at ASEAN Centre for Biodiversity take storytelling seriously for conservation. And I want to share with you a really exciting project that we're working on, particularly on this topic. So I'll cover a little bit about why storytelling and why now, why is it important, and talk about youth in ASEAN, how many people we are here. ASEAN is one of the sub-regions captured in the East Asian Australasian Flyway, and then talk about the Young ASEAN Storytellers Program. So first, a quick introduction to what the ACV is. We are an intergovernmental organization established in 2005 that facilitates cooperation amongst the members of the ASEAN. So those are 10 countries: Brunei, Cambodia, Indonesia, Lao PDR, Malaysia, Myanmar, Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam. And we facilitate the cooperation amongst them and with relevant national and international organizations on the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity in the region. So I help to coordinate the youth program in ACB. One of the things that we are trying to focus on now is storytelling for conservation. And we've dedicated a whole youth program for it, which I'll talk about in a bit. But I wanted to share a little bit why do we care about storytelling for conservation, and why now? So a key phrase that we turn to is because storytelling is the most powerful way to put ideas into the world today. Powerful because storytelling evokes emotions. You often hear that emotions can take over people and drive them, inspire them, make them do something. Sometimes things that they might not necessarily, that they might regret later on, but that shows sort of the power of emotions, right? And stories can evoke those emotions in people. And there's another part of this phrase that we also look at, which is to put ideas into the world today. So if you want to share something, if you want to talk about how important biodiversity is and our nature, our natural spaces, those ideas can be instilled in someone else through storytelling. We'll talk about why it's also more powerful. But before that, I wanted to share about why or what is so important that we want to tell the stories of. What is so important that we want to conserve? It's our rich biological and cultural heritage. They're very intertwined. ASEAN is very diverse, biologically speaking, and also culturally speaking. We cover only, it's not 1/3 actually. The statistics here are not right, but we cover only 3% of the land area in the world, but we harbor almost 1/5, 18% of all known plants and animals in the world. And 37% of the species in the ASEAN are considered endemic, which means you can't find them outside of the region. So we're very, very diverse, biologically speaking. But looking at these numbers, do you feel anything much? Maybe it would help if you see a little bit more of what these numbers mean. All these different creatures that we can see around the region. And of course, a map to sort of get everyone else to know where ASEAN is, or the different countries that form the ASEAN. Then sharing a little bit more statistics of why or how diverse we are. We have 34% of the world's coral reef species, which consists of at least 600 species of hard corals and 1,300 reef-associated fish species. This focuses a little bit more on the marine environment. We have 51 of the world's mangrove species just in this region, which is less than 3% of the world's land area. We have 23 of the world's seagrass species, and 173,000 kilometers consists of coastline in the ASEAN. Okay, sure, I just shared with you tons and tons of numbers, but what does that look like? How do you even begin to understand that, right? So here's just a quick image to let you see the majestic beauty of the natural spaces that we have in the ASEAN. This is in Khao Sok National Park in Thailand. And here you can see exactly what I mean. Coastline in ASEAN is 173,000 kilometers. So, before I get to that. So I think I wanted to sort of say that we have a lot of statistics. We have scientists who would make sure that these numbers are accurate, because they form the scientific basis for the policies that we have for conservation. But for the general public, for the people where numbers kind of don't really make much sense to them, being able to see it, being able to understand, so why is this important, helps by having stories be told about these numbers. And in stories, you'll find that numbers don't necessarily feature that heavily. And continuing with this story, and the challenge that we're facing here is that all of this biodiversity is in danger. We have activities that are threatening our natural spaces, including burning of forest land, hunting of species, directly exploiting these species. Climate change is also causing global warming, which is causing bleaching of our corals. Coral bleaching is an activity where the water gets too warm, and then it stresses out the corals because it's too hot for them than what they're used to, what is best for them. And they sort of, in that stress moment, they release the associated organisms that live within them, such that they kind of decolor. So we call that like bleaching. And when they bleach, they're actually still alive, but not for much longer, because what they release actually is what helps to make food for them. So bleaching activities are happening in our region. There's also unsustainable dumping of wastes that's causing pollution into our landscapes. Here are also more photos of degradation and drought and deforestation in and around the region. So these are all threatening our natural spaces and our landscapes. And of course, the ecosystem services that this provides to our people. healthy and clean ecosystems provide food, they provide livelihood, it provides water, it provides clean air, it provides essentially the basis for our cultural identity and also for our daily lives in the ASEAN. So young people around the ASEAN are already doing a lot about conservation. We are change makers in the region, and we're trying to conserve our natural heritage because we see it disappearing. We experience the disasters that are happening in greater frequency and in greater intensity because of climate change. So young people are organizing lots and lots of conservation activities like tree planting activities, understanding more about our wildlife, workshops, conversations. We're also showing our decision makers that we no longer want business as usual. We care about the environment and we want to be able to live sustainably with it. And that's because youth in ASEAN make up most of the ASEAN population. Youth is defined as 15 to 35 years old in the ASEAN, but each country might have a slightly different definition. So for example, in Thailand, youth is defined as 15 to 25, but just generally speaking, for all the 10 countries, we're talking about those within 15 to 35. And this is an age group where you're sort of going from being dependent within your family, within your society, to becoming independent as people in society and contributing. But we also can see from this pie chart that most of ASEAN is young. More than half of it, 65%, are under 35 years old. So I hope most of us here in this meeting are young, and we will be the ones living in this future. So we have a big say in how we want our environment to be sustainably managed. And so lots of young people are already doing conservation work. And we realize that we also have a lot of young people who are storytellers, who realize that all these statistics that I've been sharing, that they've been listening to in class, doesn't really move them that much. But if they watch a documentary, how many of you have watched sort of like a David Attenborough documentary and you felt like, oh my gosh, there's so much that we have in this world that we need to care for. So we looked around the ASEAN region to find photographers, to find artists, to find writers, to find people who make films, to find people who do many other kinds of things. Some people do digital art, and some people do podcasting. We looked for them through our Young ASEAN Storytellers program. So I'll quickly just share about what this is. We looked for 20 of these young ASEAN storytellers and brought them to an ASEAN Heritage Park in their own country. And AHP is sort of the best of the best protected areas in the ASEAN region, so that they can then gain inspiration and gather materials to tell powerful stories of conservation, to inspire the ASEAN public, because we know that these statistics don't really work anymore, and we need stories to really reach and connect people. Their stories will be exhibited on a virtual platform, which we are currently in the middle of building. So I cannot share with you some of the materials just quite yet. We're going to be launching this exhibition at the 7th ASEAN Heritage Parks Conference in Indonesia. And we're hoping that this event would be attended by high-level officials to then see the impressive and inspiring work of the youth. So just very quickly sharing the program objectives, inspiring the ASEAN public about biodiversity conservation, identify and build capacity of young creatives in the region so that they can appreciate better our biological and cultural diversity. And of course, to then expand this, the SIPA net, which is the network of people in the region that work on communication for biodiversity. So I'm really excited to tell you that we have 20 young ASEAN storytellers. This is just a big image of sort of every single one of them, but we have photographers, videographers, storytellers, bloggers, vloggers. We have people who are performing artists. We have someone who created a music video a song to sort of share and capture the practices of indigenous peoples living in and around Taman Negara National Park in Malaysia. We have someone working on podcasts. We have a watercolor painter who is painting landscapes and doing a tutorial series about how to use watercolor paintings to capture images and the different techniques that we use. So these are just some of the stories that we're really excited to be sharing. I'll quickly breeze through the different kinds of people we have. But what this really shows is that we have many different ways to tell stories, through illustration, through photography, through film, through writing, through performing arts, through poetry. And many of these people are multi-talented. So I'm really looking forward to their stories, which will be exhibited towards the end of October and the beginning of November. And we will share more details, but just at right this moment, we aren't able to really share all the preview materials, but I'm really excited to then really show you what storytelling for conservation can look like. So thank you very much for listening in to my presentation today.
Great. Thank you, Mika. Thanks for the overview of the importance of the storytelling to conservation. And yeah, it's exciting to learn about the new program from ASEAN's Centre for Biodiversity with these group of talented young artists that joining to messaging the conservation in different formats. So I know like photography is one of the tools or one of the mostly used media for storytelling. So I'm going to introduce to you the second speaker, Mr. Gab Mejia, a conservation photographer and National Geographic explorer. And mentioning earlier that we have the Flower Youth Forum, and that's how I knew Gab. And when he was supporting as a co-organizing team from the Youth Engaged in Wetlands. Gab is from the Philippines, and he is photographer, of course, environmental storyteller, and an engineer. His work focuses on stories on the climate crisis, endangered wildlife, and the intersectionality of culture and environment. He is now a National Geographic explorer and an emerging league fellow in the International League of Conservation Photographers. He has published stories in the National Geographic magazines, National Geographic channels, Nikon, WWF, Arts Partners, and among other arts and media platforms. Currently, Gab is also being a board members of the trustee for the WWF the Philippines. So please welcome Gab.
Hi everyone. Thank you so much for taking your Saturday here with us. Thanks so much, Vivian, and thanks so much, Mika. You know, really inspired by how beautiful and amazing ASEAN is, and how much biodiverse our region is, and how much we need to tell more stories about it. So today I'll be actually telling more about how storytelling could actually be transformative and positive, creating positive and transformative impact conservation. So I'm a photographer. Just before anything else, I'm a photographer. I'm a conservation photographer. And I never really knew that photography or storytelling would really have a big impact on how I can use it in my life, and as well as our country, especially in protecting nature and wildlife. I really grew up loving and climbing mountains and going to lakes and visiting mangroves. And this really sparked my passion for, conservation, and really seeing the different wildlife species that we have, seeing everything around us, and seeing the beautiful landscapes that I grew up in. And I hope that, the youth or the future generations would also have the same privilege that I had to experience the pristine beauty of nature. And I never really saw photography and I never really imagined photography to really actually be so powerful in a way to for conservation, and how this dream job of holding a camera and going to different places wasn't just a tool, but also a window in how I shape the world and how I can navigate through the world and seeing the beauty and the fragility of nature and the environment. So this camera actually allowed me to travel to different places around the planet, which I'm so grateful for. And I realized how these memories and these frames that I had within this tool that I had could actually make a transformative change. And it allowed me to see, the beautiful, amazing creatures from primates, monkeys, mammals, all the way to, of course, our avian raptors, birds, and migratory birds from different wetlands in different areas, and also even like alien-like creatures like this Philippine tarsier, which kind of resembles us humans as well, and seeing the similarities that we have within the natural world. But amidst documenting the beauty of our planet, I also realized, as covering especially stories about the fragility of these ecosystems, the fragility of the habitats that these species live in. I'll show you a video, a project that we worked on in the Agusan marshlands, where the effects and the impacts of climate change and other social anthropogenic threats have kind of destroyed the environments that these migratory birds and amazing animals that we have around our planet. Photography allowed me to see the stark contrast, of the ability to be able to show and perceive the beauty of nature, as well as to show the true realities and the issues that we're facing as a planet. And seeing wildlife, birds being burnt, birds dying within the habitats and home that they call. But if there's one thing that I realized with the power of photography storytelling, is that we do have this power within us, this voice within us, to act now, that we have to act now amidst all the urgency and the threats that we're facing. And I think this is what separates, I guess, the nature photographers with really the conservation photography, and how conservation photography is really showing about the realities and threats that our environment and these natural spaces that we have in our backyards, and being able to transform these stories to powerful tools and powerful impact, bringing awareness, creating organizations, bringing people to help and fund and support conservation efforts, not just in the Philippines, but also around the world. Because it's not that people are not don't care. It's just that a lot of people aren't really aware, or they don't have this information at hand, or there are no local storytellers out there who would be able to tell these stories in their backyard. And I guess this is why photography, multimedia, TikTok, even all the social media platforms and other content and multimedia mediums that we have, we can use this to be able to spread awareness, educate, and inspire others to act now for the planet. I like to share the story that we worked in, especially because this largest wetlands in the Philippines called the Agusan marshlands. And it's an interesting story because growing up, I also realized we were really told about stories about oceans, forests, mountains, but one thing that really kind of my curiosity is about wetlands. How these transitionary landscapes weren't really as popular, or weren't really as talked about within our daily daily conversations, or even in schools when growing up. So I really focused my photography in being able to document this forgotten, or not forgotten, but as well as undercovered ecosystem called wetlands. And through National Geographic, I was privileged enough to go to the Agusan marshlands to do a whole conservation-driven storytelling project to uncover the issues, and as well as to show about this wetland. So the Agusan marshlands is also part of the Ramsar International List of Wetlands of Importance, and an ASEAN Natural Heritage Park, which is part of what Mika was talking about a while ago. And it's really a beautiful landscape, but more so is about the indigenous communities or the underserved communities and minorities that are being affected by the socio-economic impacts, and as well as the anthropogenic threats that are infiltrating or affecting really the livelihoods of the communities who have lived and coexisted with the marsh for centuries. So in the Agusan marshlands, the intersectionality of the environment and culture really strums well, because in the middle of in the heart of the swamp, in the heart of the marsh, lives an indigenous community called the Manobo Tribe, who have coexisted for centuries within the marsh. They have traditions, rituals with deep reverence for the swamps and wetlands around us. And one thing is that, you know, even if these areas are considered heritage parks, or, you know, they're protected by intergovernmental treaties, a lot are really not being done in protecting and conserving the environment, wherein you would see people would be destroying or encroaching on the land to transform into palm oil plantations, or they are not really showing the impacts of climate change, how droughts affects the peatlands, how it's draining the water, how it's drying up the lakes and rivers and changing the currents, and how does this affect the people who are living in them. And this is really what the focus of the storytelling, and how it actually created a case wherein we were able to work with National Geographic to really bring the indigenous communities at the front lines of environmental conservation. Because not much are we talk about environmental conservation through wildlife photography or just showing animals and creatures, but not really about the people or the locals who have known the science, have traditional knowledge, and have been protecting the area for centuries. And this is what I guess the focus of the conservation storytelling, and how we can use and amplify these stories and bring in collaboration, you know, listening to them and really asking them what they need and how we could help them, and not the other way around. And really bringing, you know, trying to uplift and amplify the voices that they have in their homes, because they're the best caretakers for these environments. And through that work, you know, we had Greta, we had other activists, we had local organizations, youth organizations, and even bringing it to the table through international organizations to bring the story of Agusan marshlands to the world. And this was really the power of storytelling, and how it brings people together to fight for a common goal, or to, you know, to dream and have a shared dream for our environment, a shared dream for our planet, our wetlands, and other natural ecosystems. And I also like to share, I guess, a recent story that we worked on, especially in how we can amplify stories, amplify the stories of people, was during the pandemic, when we worked with the Tamarao wildlife rangers, or those animal wildlife rangers who have been protecting this critically endangered species in the Philippines, called the Tamara, which is an Asian dwarf buffalo. And there's only about 400, an estimated 400 of them left in the wild, and their population is dwindling, and they can only be found in one single island province here in the Philippines and the whole world. And, you know, these stories, especially during the pandemic, when the financial constraints affected them, nobody was telling the stories about how these rangers were suffering, how these rangers were having to find loans in restaurants just to buy rice for their families because they weren't being paid, or like there was a cutoff with the budget, and affecting how and because of this, you know, they had to almost fire about 30 Tamara rangers who were protecting these species. And we needed to get the story worded out. We went to media publications, we went to journal publications, and really to amplify the project, and even created a whole campaign called Together for Tamaraos, you know, to show how by protecting the Tamara rangers, we can also protect the species, the Tamaraos, who have also depended and coexisted within the island province of Mindoro. And because of this, you know, there were poaching incidents. The Tamaraos were being hunted for meat, and you start to realize and understand how everything's interconnected in a way. And by telling this story through the campaign, with Together for Tamaraos campaign, it was able to succeed and even raise up to about $32,000 to keep the Tamaraos jobs, to secure the livelihoods of these Tamara rangers. And this is where you see, you know, how storytelling could actually have a profound and concrete impact in conservation efforts, in being able to even possibly raise funds to support the livelihoods and to secure the livelihoods of the people who have dedicated their lives in protecting these species, which we ultimately depend on. And storytelling can be really, really big, and of genres you can talk about. But what I really advocate the most also is about telling stories locally, and how you can, every one of us living in our own homes have their own short story, or our own story from our backyard, about the environment, about nature, about our families, or about how people actually connect with nature, and how we can each, using our cameras, using even our smartphones or our phones or video cameras, to tell these stories. And it shouldn't be limited. One thing that about conservation storytelling or photography is that it shouldn't just be limited through stills or imagery, but as well as motion. You can even create campaigns, TikToks, just like what Mika was sharing about how these amazing youth leaders and youth storytellers around ASEAN are doing right now. We are a creative species, and we have to use our potentials, even as the youth, as young people who have so much energy, have innovative ideas, to really showcase and bring these stories forward. Because who else will tell the stories of our own? Who else will tell the stories of our country but not us? And we can use these stories really to protect the people, because in protecting our people, it protects our wildlife, and protecting wildlife ultimately protects our climate. There's so many stories out there, and you have to start, I guess, with your apart. Go explore in your local park, go explore in your protected areas, in your local river, wherever it is. It's brimming with life. It's brimming with conflict. It's brimming with characters and inspiring people out there who could actually, have this voice and leverage and amplify their voices for people to hear about the problems and issues in conservation. And it can even spark from animals like the Philippine eagle to large ecosystems like reefs, and even people. So in ending this, I'd like to share this short video, because it's only through stories that we can really connect with each other. And I hope through this video, you can actually realize how impactful connecting, how impactful it is for us to connect with nature and connect with the people around us to bring these stories forward. For there's no hope without impact. So I hope after this, you can find your own story out there, tell the story about your local backyard, about your home, about the beautiful places that you have, and how we can, protect these places and conserve them for future generations as well, and for us as well. So thank you so much for listening, and hope to hear your questions if you have any.
Great. Thank you, Gab, for bringing us these excellent stories and all these impactful images and videos to us. And yeah, I really strongly agree that the message that you bring, the power for the storytelling to conservation. So I'm sure it's impress and inspire a lot of people. And last but not least, we also have our inspiring storyteller, Millie Formby, and she is bringing us her own adventure, not only as a photographer or illustrator, but she herself is flying along with the migratory water birds. So Millie is from Australia, and she is zoologist, pilot, illustrator, educators, and she is now funding a project called the Wing Threads. She started learning fly in 2016 and to follow the shorebirds on migration. Millie also have a background in the arts and is an illustrator now for the children's book. I have this on my with me, if you can see it. It's called the Wing Threads, and she is also doing a tour along her flying journey to give classes to the school students. And now that she is doing all this flying journey, and I can't wait to listen to Millie's for her story. So Pat, I would like to invite Millie to join us today. Thank you.
Thanks, Vivian. I'll just share my screen. Okay. Oh no, that's not what I wanted to happen. Hang on, let's go back here. Alrighty. Okay, thanks Vivian. Thanks as well to the EAAF for inviting me to speak with you today. So yeah, my name's Millie and I'm a pilot and I'm currently flying around Australia in a microlight aircraft. It's a type of powered hang glider, and the project is called Wing Threads Flight Around Oz. And I'm incredibly passionate about conservation messaging, and I find that a lot of environmental messaging often uses doom and gloom stories to motivate us to act. And I have noticed it can lead to feelings of hopelessness and powerlessness when you only hear all of the bad things that are going wrong. So that really led me to this question, well, how do we motivate people to act in an empowering way that without dodging the facts about what's really happening as well? So that's really what led me to create Wing Threads. And I think Mika and Gab both spoke so beautifully about how storytelling is such a powerful way to be able to do that and get people to engage, often with large numbers of statistics and things like that, in a way that's not overwhelming. The storytelling is really the way that we as humans understand concepts and connect with other people. So I've been working in migratory shorebird conservation now for almost 10 years through the Australasian Wader Studies Group and BirdLife Australia as well. And during that time, I really love the community and the international cooperation that happens there. And I see a lot of really great examples of people taking action that is effective and positive. And those stories don't get told as often as the what's going wrong stories. I think it's really important to bring those stories to the table just to balance out the picture. It's very difficult to have a vision of what we do want to see when we don't know what that looks like. So also wanting to share those stories with everyone. And my background is also in the arts as well as science, as Vivian mentioned. So I also bring my illustrative skills to the table. So for those who aren't totally familiar with shorebirds, the migratory birds fly from Australia in the south all the way up to the Arctic in the north to breed every year via the East Asian Australasian Flyway, and it's a 25,000 kilometre round trip. And the smallest species to do it is a redneck stint. A little bird only weighs as much as a piece of toast. And this little bird can fly up to 5,000 kilometers in one go. And equally impressive is the bar-tailed godwit, which holds the world record for the longest non-stop flight of any bird species. And this guy can fly. Oh, sorry. There's a very famous bar-tailed godwit. Her name is E7, and this is a picture of E7 in the center of the screen. And she blew researchers away after they fitted her with a satellite tracker, and she flew non-stop all the way from Alaska in the United States, all the way across the Pacific Ocean to New Zealand. It was a 12,000 kilometer trip, and she did it in 9 days without taking a break. So it's just phenomenal that these birds can do these incredible distances. And we also know that these birds are very long-lived. So by the time they're 18 years old, they will have flown the equivalent distance from Earth all the way to the moon. That's a distance of 384,000 kilometers. So it's pretty mind-blowing to think that a little bird the size of a redneck stint can do this kind of journey in its lifetime. So these birds are also among the most endangered birds in the world, and that's largely due to habitat loss, as well as climate change, agriculture and fishing impacting on wetland usage, and of course hunting. Some of these birds are still hunted as well in different parts of the flyway, and all of these things combined put a lot of stresses on these birds. But what I really love about shorebirds is they have this beautiful message to share, and that is that we are all connected to one another through these wetland habitats, through the East Asian Australasian Flyway. So the wetlands they're using on the way to rest and refuel are like a chain with links in it. And each one of those links in the chain, if it's lost or if it's degraded, the whole chain starts to lose its integrity. So they really highlight for us, they're a beautiful story of how by taking care of our own link in the chain in the flyway, by caring for our local wetlands here at home, that we can have an impact on an international scale. And they also show how we're all connected to one another through ecological networks through the EAAF. So the EAAF spans 23 countries, and over half of the world's population lives just in our flyway alone. It's pretty massive. So I really love using the story of the shorebirds as a way to illustrate for people this message of how we're all connected. So that's really the story that inspired me, and the story that I wanted to share with others as well, as a way to step into showing how we are all connected to one another, and introduce people who are potentially not familiar with shorebirds to this story. Because one of the things I kept coming up against when I was when I've been working in shorebird conservation is that BirdLife Australia identifies a lack of awareness as the #1 threat to migratory birds when they're here in Australia. And getting the word out to people who aren't already familiar with birds can be quite a tricky one. So I was struck with this idea about 6 years ago that I could learn to fly a microlight and follow them on migration from Australia to Siberia. And when the idea hit me, it was very clear to me that it could be a hook, I suppose, for engaging people who are outside of that birding community and using the adventure as a way to engage people. So I didn't have any flying experience in my family. No one's a pilot in my family. I had no aspirations to become a pilot either before I came up with this idea. So I decided I'd better go and see if I actually like flying. So I did. I went and did a trial instructional flight in a microlight. This is one of those early flights that I did with my instructor, Gordon. And I fell in love with it. I just thought it was the best thing ever. So I've now been a pilot for about 6 years. I got my license in 2017. And in 2018, thanks to many generous donors and sponsors, I was able to get my own microlight aircraft as well. And I actually worked in the factory that built these aircraft near Sydney in New South Wales, and was able to help build the aircraft, and the company also assisted me with getting that aircraft too. So now, before I do this big trip to Siberia, the first thing I want to do is fly around Australia. It's really a way to test my pilot wings, I suppose, but it's also a way to test out how the storytelling aspect of the project goes. So I took off on this journey. It's called Wing Threads Flight Around Oz. I took off from a white gum farm, which is where I learned to fly, and on June the 3rd, so that's about a 2-hour drive east of Perth, for those who are unfamiliar. And since then I've flown, I think I've got oh no, I don't yet. The plan is to fly all the way around Australia, so the whole trip will be about 20,000 kilometres by the time I finish, which is a similar distance to what the shorebirds fly on migration to the Arctic and back every year. And originally I thought it was going to take about 6 months, but I think it's going to take me closer to a year now, because the weather is a huge factor in this particular adventure. So the microlight needs to have calm conditions to fly in. So I'm not sure if this video will play. This is just to give you a bit of an idea of what it's like to fly the microlight. This is me taking off from White Gum Farm back in June. And you can see it's an open cockpit aircraft, and I actually control the aircraft by with that control bar I'm holding onto. It's directly connected to the wing, so it's quite physical to fly the aircraft. So I chose a microlight because I wanted to recreate that physical experience that the birds have when they migrate, as well as being exposed to the elements like the birds are too. And the microlight flies at a similar speed to what the shorebirds do as well. So I fly along at about 55 knots or 100 kilometres an hour, and we've got records of shorebirds flying at about 80 kilometres an hour. So this is where I've gone so far. I started over in Perth on the left-hand side of the screen there, and I've flown all the way along the south coast of Western Australia, across the Nullarbor Plain and around Eyre Peninsula, and over, I'm just south of Adelaide at the moment in a town called Strathalbyn. So it's been 13 flight legs, and in that time I've visited 27 schools actually, and travelled just over 3,000 kilometres. And through those school visits so far, I've reached about 1,500 students, and I'm only about a quarter of the way there so far. So the illustrations I showed earlier, some of them are from my book, A Shorebird Flying Adventure. So I was approached by CSIRO Publishing a couple of years ago, who heard about my project and asked if I'd like to create a book based on my adventure. And they wanted more female role models in STEM. And of course, I jumped at the opportunity, and my friend Jackie has written that book and I've illustrated it. And it's aimed at mid-primary students. I think it's really important to engage young people in conservation and be able to share all of those exciting, fun facts about shorebirds in a way that's fun and playful, and not just throwing a bunch of information and numbers at them. So this is some images from the school visits I've been doing. And another thing I've done on the right-hand side there, I actually do a drawing class, how to draw shorebirds session with the kids at the end of the school visits, because drawing is a wonderful way to get people to connect with nature. When you draw, you need to slow down. It forces you to stop and be observant and really have a look at what you are drawing. So it is a great way to introduce people to this environment. It's a way to connect with your environment through drawing. And the same features that we focus on to draw a bird are the same ones that we use for bird identification. So it's a great way to introduce them to bird ID as well. And they just love it. It's pretty fun drawing cartoons. So yeah, for me, storytelling is a powerful way to engage young people with issues like species extinction and plastic pollution, climate change, all of those big issues in a way that's not overwhelming for them, but still gives them the facts as well. And I think not everybody necessarily cares about shorebirds, but most people are inspired by adventure, and they usually love cartoons and art and things like that. So by using science, art and adventure, engaging people with shorebirds who may not have been familiar with them previously. So it's my dream that birds like bar-tailed godwits and redneck stints will become household names like pandas and orangutans and blue whales, and the habitats considered as worthy of protection. And I hope that the wing thread story helps to spread the shorebird word in that way. And I invite everyone here too to join me on the adventure. I live stream all of my flights on YouTube, and my channel is called Wing Threads. And you can also follow me on social media. Thanks, and I'll leave it there. Thanks, Vivian.
Wow, cool. That's wonderful. Yes, I think in 2020, when I first heard about you, I was already amazed by your adventure already. And now knowing your book is published and you are doing your journey and go bring these stories to the schools and interact with them so that the students also have a feeling or know more about the birds and following your stories. I think you will be having a lot of more followers to go for with the birds as well. So yeah, thank you very much for bringing this great stories and your work, and also to our amazing speakers Gab and Mika. So now I would like to invite people to our audience, if you would like to leave your questions in the chat box, or in case you wanted to have a direct dialogue with the speakers, please also raise your hands, and we will invite you. So yeah, now let me invite Mika and Gab as well to join. Cool. Okay. Anyone have questions? Yeah. Everyone is saying like, wow, amazing stories, Millie, and good story from Gab, and yeah, all are really good. So if I missed you in the hand raising, please let me know. Well, okay, maybe I go first. Yeah, well, for especially maybe this is for Millie and Gab. How did you realize and pick the media that you use? Like for Gab, how did you know that you want to go with photography? And for Millie, how did you? I know like the trigger is the flying with the micro light, but you also have illustration. But how did you like go with this choice? Gab
Let's
and
go.
Millie?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. I guess the camera chose, I never really expected to do photography. I just love taking photos and memories of nature. And I guess I just followed my intuition to trust the camera and the power it has, and really just keep on taking photos. So every time I would, during university time, I would really get out of my way, even before exams, even during classes, which I don't advise to cut classes, but like to really go into the park and just be with nature, and just sometimes climb a mountain at 2 a.m. even if I'm alone and I don't have friends, and just having my camera as my partner in life. And I think that's really how I chose the photography. But of course, I'm also experimenting because I realize how there's just so much more to learn, and to not be limited with just one type of medium, but really explore other alternatives for storytelling.
Great, thanks, Gab. And how about Millie?
Yeah, the illustration side of things, I've always loved drawing since I was a kid, and always loved drawing animals. So for me, it just made sense to bring those two things together. And I often found like I really like bringing humor and comedy and things like that as well to the table, because I think those things are really engaging for people. Most people enjoy laughing. I know I do. So drawing the birds with googly eyes and things like that, it just cracks me up. So yeah, people really love seeing funny drawings and animation and things like that. And I draw a lot of my inspiration from animation and comic books and things like that as well. So yeah, I guess I relate to what Gab was saying with it's just a natural progression. Like you follow what you love and you find yourself doing anyway, and bring those skills to the table.
Great.
Definitely following your passion, what you're already naturally drawn to.
Yeah, that's great. And I have a follow-up questions. It's also extended to Mika, because now like Gab and Millie, they are like naturally following your hearts for like photography and illustration with the flying. Then how did you find a way to let people know? Like I'm curious about like channelizing it. Of course, now technology with YouTube and platform, there are lots of ways, but like getting people to know you and support your work. Like, yeah, what was your experience? And Mika, you met with a lot of young people, young artists now. Like, what would be the channels for them?
Sorry, by channels, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, like the way that we can, like the young artists can share their work and let people know. And it's not like just within it's not just within their, like just on your own Facebook. Yeah, like how did you publicize? And yeah.
Okay, sorry, I just had to close the door a little bit. My daughter was like going, ah, ah. She's really small. She's still 1 year, 1 year old. The channel. So actually, a lot of young people that we work with are influencers in their own way. They've built up their own channels and audience and the following, depending on the kinds of storytelling medium that they use. So for example, for Gab, he has a following. You saw some of his fans in the chat box. Yeah. And it's mostly because of just how inspirational their work is. So I've heard, or I know that for some of the young ASEAN storytellers are just starting in their journey. So getting this opportunity to be a young ASEAN storyteller will definitely sort of launch what they're trying to do with conservation storytelling in their chosen medium. And others are more well established, and they have their own following and different channels that they use. So I guess for people who are wondering how to get started, I myself don't do these things, but I sort of hear and learn from others. And I was looking up resources. There's actually National Geographic has actually done a resource page. It's part of their Gen Geo initiative, and they have this Gen Geo for storytelling online training courses, so that young people can actually learn about like photography for storytelling, filmmaking for storytelling, or even doing infographics, converting science and hard numbers into something that people better understand. Let me find the link and I'll put it in the chat box. But those are, so I think it's online courses that you can take anytime that you want. And each course is about 8 hours long in total, with different segments and activities that you can do. But those teach you the skills. As for the channels, I would really turn the answers, turn this question to the ones who do influence others. Partly it's probably because of the level of skill that they have in their craft, in their work. But being, of course, social media savvy is one other way to reach or to find an audience.
Yeah.
And
Great.
now we have the internet, so it's a lot easier, but there's a lot of competition. In the past, it was all just by oral tradition, like the elder would sit by the fire with people coming to listen, or the mom would just tell a story to the child. It's all orally passed on in the past.
Great. Thank you, Mika. Yes, I also took the course from the Gen Geo course. But yeah, still not yet a good photographer yet. Yes, any other thoughts from Gab and Millie on this? Yeah. No? Okay. Well, we actually had also one question from Yunze. Is how do you measure the environmental impacts of your work? Are there any signs you look for? That's a good questions about like measuring the impacts.
I know with my work, that's essential. I think you've definitely got to be looking at whether or not what you're doing is effective. And I send out feedback surveys after all of the school visits. I send out a survey to all the teachers and get some feedback. What's difficult there is finding out whether it's actually having an impact directly from the kids, because you can't survey the kids, but I can survey the teachers, and they are one of my main audiences. So it's really key as well to know who your audience is. So some of the questions I ask are like, how likely are you now that you've had this incursion to bring shorebirds into the classroom and start teaching it? And that's been one of the biggest impacts, is that most teachers say that they are likely to do that, either likely or very likely to do that now, and if they have the resources to do it. So I think that's a really huge thing, because if you can get give teachers the tools and the confidence to be able to start talking about shorebird conservation and have that as a topic in the classroom, that's a big one. Yeah. And you can ask them as well, you know, how are the kids responding to the material? Is it pitched at the right level? All of that kind of stuff. So, yeah.
Thank you, Millie. And how about Gab? Do you like check how many likes, how many reads from your
So
work?
I think the thing with crafting long-term stories, because I focus more on long-term storytelling, is really having that impact. Like even before going to document or going to a place, there's a lot of research involved. What are the gaps? And you ask that, is there a gap in education? Is there a gap with curriculums? Are these like ecosystems not being taught in curriculums? And that's where we kind of weave ourselves in the tools, or like the things that we have, or the talents that we have, or the specialties that we have in photography. For example, in the campaign for the Tamaraw Rangers, this was the problem, and how can we help? The problem was that the Rangers were being fired, and because there's not enough funding going in to support the livelihoods of these Rangers. So we already had an assessment of what we can do of the problem. And the thing that we can do to make an impact is to actually raise and secure the livelihoods of these Tamaraw Rangers through campaigns, through donorship programs. And that actually kind of is the concrete impact in that problem. And so because of that project, or that campaign, storytelling campaign, it secured the livelihood of the Tamaraw Rangers for 3 years. I think the issue with impact is really about having it before you even go out there to do a project or do a storytelling project. Or sometimes you even find the problems, I guess, along the way, if it's the documentary aspect of it. But you know, being prepared and really assessing it early on, and that's where you can really address the issues. So yeah, a lot of research before, because we're trying to steer away also from that kind of parachute storytelling or parachute science, wherein you just go to one place and fly out and like, did you actually do something, or are you actually causing harm? So there's a lot of monitoring as well that we do after the project. We see if there are organizations following up. We see if there's like a lot of leverage from media who wants to pick up the story as well, and see where it's going to go and head, making sure that these stories are reaching the right audience. So like from local government, we were working with the story as well to the local government. For example, in the Agusan marshlands, we were working with the story for the local government about enforcement, because they're the ones actually managing the protected area in the Agusan marshlands, or the enforcement of the Agusan marshlands with the Biodiversity Management Bureau. And for the youth, we were making collaterals about wetland education, and as well as stories for the almanac with National Geographic, with National Geographic Kids. So it really depends on your audience and assessing, of course, the issues already at hand.
Yeah, totally agree. And yeah, I think there are much work need to be, as you said, like doing the research at the beginning, to prepare yourself to know about the stories, to know about the culture, science beforehand. It's also really important for in the storytelling part, preparation. So we're actually running out of time. So yeah, if you are having more questions, you can leave us the message here in the chat. Maybe we can bring it back to the speakers later on, or you can also reach out to the speakers. So now we are going to close the Q&A section, and we are going to wrap up. If Yumi could share the moderators the PowerPoint again, that would be good. Thank you, Millie, Gab, and Mika for the excellent presentation and really inspiring storytelling. Yeah, please follow us at EAFP, and you can also reach out to us to share what you have done. And for this webinar, we are going to upload an edited video version for the YouTube. And yes, before we close, 21st of October, which we will have the 5 finalist teams of the Youth Think Tank competition to present their projects and showcase how youth can also make a difference. So please stay tuned with us on our channels. And I will also, if you would like to join and support our work and like support future events like this, then you can also reach out to us and join as volunteers and even join us as interns, like what Yumi and Yunjae is doing now. So thank you very much for all your participation today, and I hope to see you again. And once again, a big hands of applause to our great speakers today.
Thank you, Vivian. Thank you, EAFP. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you,
Yeah,
everyone.
Yes.